The Lord of the Rings is one of the best examples of moral complexity in fantasy, arguably in all of fiction. I imagine that's not a statement you have heard often, as Tolkien's great novel is regularly cast as a simple story of good versus evil, where the good guys are good, the bad guys are bad, and that's that. I have, myself, in my ignorance, likely made such assertions in the past. But to quote one of Tolkien's letters in which he referenced reviewers critiquing Lord of the Rings as simple-minded, this is a tale about war, and if war is allowed, at least as a topic and a setting, it is not much good complaining that all the people on one side are against those on the other. Tolkien, as you likely know, served in the British Army during World War I, which is for all the evil on our own side, with large view good against evil. Men, individually, are not binary creatures. We are not all good or all bad. We are dreadfully contradictory, making virtuous choices one moment and then sinking into depravity the next. The righteous side in war almost never abstains from committing atrocities. Tolkien knew this. He understood the human capacity for good and evil in ways both large and small, having experienced it firsthand, not only at the Battle of the Somme, but in every petty or grouchy administrator he encountered during his years at university. War is a grim, hard, ugly business, but it is as good a master as Oxford, or better. I have been rather successful since in my career in dealing with all sorts from students to surly clerks, but I owe that to the army. Moral complexity, then, is nothing more than telling the truth about human morality. And while the heroes of Lord of the Rings, Sam, Frodo, Aragorn, Theoden, Faramir, etc., display virtue that can be rarely observed even within the history books, their unrivaled valor does not take away in the slightest from the truth about human nature contained within this novel. While those men serve as platonic ideals for the form of nearly every virtue, we are also presented with characters who are, sadly, far more realistic in nature. Boromir and Denethor likely spring to mind first. The good men who struggle and fail under the burden of duty and the temptation to use powers beyond their ken, that they do not understand and cannot control. Both are wonderful examples of moral complexity, but as I have already made videos about them, I will instead turn my attention to how Tolkien wrote his villains. Most of the evil acts men commit are not done out of sheer malice, hatred, or spite, but simply because we tend towards selfishness, seeking our own gain and ignoring the well-being of others. While Grema's treachery, essentially selling out an entire kingdom through his lies and deceitful counsel, is on a larger scale than most of us could achieve in everyday life, his motives are not at all unusual.
When all the men are dead, you will take your share of the treasure. Too long have you watched my sister. Too long have you haunted her steps.
Side note, Jackson gave that line to Éomer in the movies, whereas Gandalf says it in the book. Though, even there, Éomer very much shares the sentiment and suspects Grima of lusting after Éowyn, which he does, both in film and on page. Again, his vice is, sadly, a common one. Where book and movie differ significantly is in their depiction of how Grima won over Theoden. Tolkien's Wormtongue is a clever, sharp-witted manipulator who is convinced the king that it is better to stay safe in Edoras, counseling cowardice disguised as prudence. Even when the arrival of Gandalf turns the tide against him, Grima still wheedles and cajoles, urging Theoden to leave him behind in Medusel, the steward of the hall, while the rest of the men ride to war. It's only at that moment that Gandalf, with the aforementioned line, reveals Grima's true master. A master who, in the movie, basically possesses Theoden, which makes one question why Grima is even necessary. This choice of Jackson's makes the character of Wormtongue far less interesting. He's a stupid toady and a babysitter, rather than an intelligent opponent who must be outwitted. Before I continue, I feel the need to state that I do love these movies so very much. Greatest trilogy of all time, no doubt. But when they did depart from the books, they often faltered. Sometimes it worked quite well. Theoden's character arc in the films is phenomenal, even though he is a much nobler figure in the book from the beginning, or at least once his mind is freed from Grima's whisperings. And once it is, Theoden does not, as he does in the film, immediately cast his counselor out from his hall. Again, remember, Wormtongue was not known to be an agent of Saruman who had somehow facilitated the wizard's magical mind invasion. In the book, he simply appeared to be a coward who gave bad advice. So, Theoden urges him to right his wrong, to find his courage, and to ride to war with the Rohirrim. Grima refuses, naturally, and is sent from Edoras in disgrace. which is a remarkable show of mercy on the part of Theoden, I must add. When our heroes next encounter Grema, it is after Sauron's defeat, as Wormtongue and Saruman are found in pitiable estate on the road. Grema expresses his hatred for his master, and Gandalf urges him to leave the disgraced wizard, but Grema seems unable to do so. This pattern repeats itself when the hobbits discover who was really behind the scouring of the Shire, with Frodo now telling Wormtongue, "You need not follow him." Saruman then mocks Grema, leading to his servant slitting Sharky's throat before getting shot dead by the hobbit archers. Tolkien says in no uncertain terms that nothing in his book is intentionally allegorical, but readily admits to the applicability of it. That is, the journeys taken by the various characters can and should have an effect on us, should be applicable to our own lives. What I appreciate most about Grema is this duality that Tolkien shows us. Wormtongue is bold, smart, and cunning, carefully laying plans to seek his own selfish ends. But he is, in the end, subservient to his own vices of lust and cowardice. The former led him to Saruman's service, and the latter kept him there, his eloquence and guile replaced by sniveling silence. This is how we all are to one extent or another. Regardless of how strong we may be in resisting vice, there is almost always one particular temptation that, when it strikes, finds us weak and vulnerable, that we cannot seem to shake no matter how much we might want to, that if it pushes hard enough, might just cause us to snap. So it was with Grema Wormtongue. It kinda sucks to admit that the villain in The Lord of the Rings to whom I can most relate is this conniving little slimeball. I ran a poll on YouTube asking my viewers who was the most despicable villain in Lord of the Rings, and Grema ranked well above both Sauron and Gollum. So it is with ordinary evil. We despise it because we know people who might sometimes act like Grema, because we can see our own selfishness in him, and that is not a pretty sight. I mean, would you rather be Gollum, though? Well, kinda. Being corrupted by a magical ring imbued with the will of the most powerful sorcerer in Middle-earth isn't exactly fun, but it is no doubt cooler than being a gutless simpleton. So we turn from our examination of the ordinary evil to that of the more mystical variety, yet a form still very much familiar to us and our own world. Now, in a way, all evil derives from some form of power or the desire for it corrupting our hearts. Grema Wormtongue was driven to evil by a promise of the power to choose the riches and the women he desired, just as Smeagol was corrupted by the power of the One Ring, the ability it gave him to move unseen, to take as he desired, even to kill whomever he wished. One crucial point to make regarding Smeagol's transformation into Gollum is that the ring did not grab hold of an innocent, ordinary hobbit-like creature and then flip him on his head, turning him 180 degrees into this vile monster. The domination of the ring was much too strong for the mean soul of Smeagol, but he would have never had to endure it if he had not become a mean sort of thief before it crossed his path. Smeagol does, as both film and book depict, commit murder so that he might possess the ring, long before it had the chance to possess him. And while it's quite likely that he would not have done so should that have been an unmagical circle of gold, the fact that he was so readily willing to kill his dear friend suggests his weakness of character is established well before ever happening upon his precious. Even so, Smeagol was not a lost cause, his ability to choose redemption still intact, at least for a time. We see this in the famous debate between Gollum and Smeagol, or Stinker and Slinker as this channel's namesake would deem them, where the two halves of Smeagol's personality and motivations argue about their course of action, whether or not they should try and take the ring back from Frodo. In the film, this debate is split up into two parts, with Smeagol emerging victorious in the first half, but Gollum ultimately triumphing in the second half, convincing Smeagol to lead the hobbits into Shelob's lair. Tolkien's original argument happens only once, though with the same final result, and Sam's reaction to overhearing the planned treachery is markedly smarter and less emotional. While Jackson did play up the tension between Sam and Smeagol to an unnecessary extent, I would argue, that conflict very much exists in the novel and was undoubtedly a factor in Gollum's ultimate failure. To quote the same letter from a moment ago, Smeagol weakened himself for the final chance when dawning love of Frodo was too easily withered by the jealousy of Sam before Shelob's lair. After that, he was lost. The scene to which Tolkien refers here is one of the most tragic moments of the entire novel. It takes place as the two hobbits are sleeping, exhausted from their long climb up the stone staircase, now on the very doorstep of Girthongol. A strange expression passed over his lean, hungry face. The gleam faded from his eyes, and they went dim and gray, old and tired. A spasm of pain seemed to twist him, and he turned away, peering back up towards the pass, shaking his head as if engaged in some interior debate. Then he came back, and slowly putting out a trembling hand, very cautiously he touched Frodo's knee. But almost the touch was a caress. For a fleeting moment, could one of the sleepers have seen him, they would have thought that they beheld an old, weary hobbit, shrunken by the years that carried him far beyond his time, beyond friends and kin, and the fields and streams of youth, an old, starved, pitiable thing. Evil, according to Tolkien, is, above all else, sad and pitiable. Does it deserve to be rooted out and destroyed? Yes, absolutely. But the undertaking cannot be done with a malicious and angry heart, or the present evil will not be removed so much as replaced by a new one. Everyone knows Gandalf's admonishment of Frodo in the Mines of Moria, of course, and deservingly so.
The pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many.
But that is hardly the only time the theme of pity and mercy makes its appearance. As mentioned, multiple characters extend their pity to Grema, and even the hobbits who were captured by Saruman's Uruk-hai take pity on the staffless wizard when they encounter him on the road home. Aragorn has pity on the men who are too afraid to follow him to the Black Gate, urging them to choose another service, and many of them find new courage because of his kindness. It is pity for the plight of Éowyn that spurs Merry to action, and so the Witch King falls. And finally, Samwise Gamgee has mercy upon the poor, pitiful creature of Smeagol upon the slopes of Mount Doom. Given the chance to kill Gollum, who is of no further use and could only cause trouble as far as the Hobbit could tell, Sam puts away his sword and turns to follow his master toward the cracks of doom. And it is only because of his pity, like the mercy of Bilbo some 50 years before, that the One Ring is destroyed and Sauron defeated. Why is pity so important to Tolkien? Why is it so often close to the hearts of his heroes? Because evil cannot pity, not truly. Evil cannot look on the sufferings of others and share their pain, be moved to tears and to action, seeking to allay their sorrows, even if it means taking up some of their burden, not purely. In whatever form it may appear, whether petty or grand, evil ultimately seeks its own gain, discarding and disregarding the good of others. Now, that is not to say that pity cannot be twisted, that it is impossible to be in the wrong if we are being empathetic, but there is a vast gap between truly seeking the objective good of another person and merely seeking to understand their emotions and wanting to make them feel good. Gandalf himself admits he would fall victim to such corruption should he take the ring as offered by Frodo. Yet the way of the ring to my heart is by pity, pity for weakness and the desire of strength to do good. How exactly would that happen? How is it possible that pity, which Tolkien held in such high esteem, could be perverted into something cruel? Gandalf doesn't say. But it would almost certainly happen subtly, malice hiding under a guise of charity, slowly twisting minds and hearts to serve its own secret ends without them realizing how, or even that, they are being corrupted. Gandalf as Ringlord would have been far worse than Sauron. He would have remained righteous, but self-righteous. He would have continued to rule and order things for good and the benefit of his subjects according to his wisdom, which was and would have remained great. Thus, while Sauron multiplied evil, he left good clearly distinguishable from it. Gandalf would have made good detestable and seem evil. Again, the exact mechanics of all this are left to the reader's imagination, but we find the theme that dominates Tolkien's philosophy on evil, one that you have doubtless heard repeatedly, probably in the comments section of Rings of Power trailers, and probably misquoted. Here's the actual quote, said by Frodo in The Return of the King, in response to Sam wondering whether the denizens of Mordor eat and drink. The shadow that bred them can only mock, it cannot make, not real new things of its own. I don't think it gave life to the orcs, it only ruined them and twisted them. Now, were the orcs actually bred in some sort of muck pit, as Jackson shows us in his version of Isengard? I don't know, maybe. And while we'll return to the topic of these unfortunate creatures later, for now, I'd like to turn our attention to the man, or rather, the wizard, who is responsible for their existence. The winner of my most despicable Lord of the Rings villain poll certainly deserves the title. Not that he's worse than Sauron, strictly speaking, but the impersonal nature of the Dark Lord of Mordor makes it easy for us to detest the treachery of Saruman far more. And Saruman is a traitor. The purpose of the Five Astari, as Tolkien explained to a questioning reader, was to encourage and bring out the native powers of the enemies of Sauron. In this, Gandalf persisted, but Saruman, after hundreds, thousands of years of struggle, gave up that fight and undertook a new pursuit, the One Ring. In this, he is far worse than Gollum. Not only was he ensnared from afar, rather than by the ring's immediate and apparent beauty, Saruman was one of the Maiar, a primordial being sent by Eru Ilúvatar himself to lead the free peoples of Middle-earth through his example of knowledge and wisdom. The problem with great knowledge is that pride waits at the extreme end of the spectrum. Saruman spent 2 millennia in Middle-earth, growing in understanding, while the race of men slowly declined after their defeat of Sauron in the days of the Last Alliance, and the elves either left for the Undying Lands or foolishly sought to preserve Middle-earth, to make their present home a paradise. The peoples he was supposed to be guiding to victory seem utterly incapable of defeating Sauron. So, Saruman pulls a Thanos.
I'll do it myself.
I mean, yeah, Saruman came first, but anyway, the most enlightening part of Saruman's villainy is not how it came to be, but rather what happens after he is defeated. It's kind of hilarious, actually, that the Great Wizard thought he could take down Sauron, but lost to a few horsemen and some tree herders. And yeah, things would have been different if his orcs had captured Frodo instead of Merry and Pippin, but, well, skill issue, bro. Once Isengard, all but the Tower of Orthanc, is in ruins, does Saruman surrender? Does he repent of his many evils? Does he ask for forgiveness from Gandalf and Theoden? No, he does not. Instead, he hurls impotent insults from the safety of his perch.
You are a lesser son of greater sires.
This scene, apart from its grisly end, is quite true to the book. The pride of Saruman is in full display. Pride is such an irrational vice. The wizard has absolutely nothing to be proud of in this moment. His army is decimated, his fortress in ruins, all that he has worked toward cast down and destroyed. And yet he persists in his arrogance, proclaiming his superiority over those who have beaten him, who walk freely through Isengard as if they own the place, which they do now. This is what pride does. It makes us lie to ourselves. Our conceit assures us that we need not stoop to the level of those we deem beneath us, even as they generously extend a hand, offering to lift us up out of the filth and muck of our own creation into which we have sunk. Pride hates, above all else, pity. It despises the idea that we must rely on the goodwill and charity of others if we are to survive and thrive. But such a truth cannot be ignored. Well, it can, but only at one's great peril. This refusal to accept the pity of others eventually leads Saruman to the Shire, his pride turning into spite. If he cannot have the object of his desire, then neither can those who stole it from him. I don't know if the omittance of the scouring of the Shire from the movies is Jackson's greatest mistake, as I definitely understand why he did not tack yet another half hour onto Return of the King, but it has to be near the top of the list, nonetheless. The main reason this chapter is so important can be outlined by Gandalf's words to the hobbits shortly before they return to find their home ruined and brutalized. I am not coming to the Shire. You must settle its affairs yourselves. That is what you have been trained for. My time is over. It is no longer my task to set things to rights, nor to help folk to do so. Despite the great victories that the hobbits had won, evil still persisted. And as long as the age of the world runs its course, it will still persist. Sauron may have fallen, but that did not remove malice and scorn from the hearts of men or wizards. Saruman's actions in the Shire may strike you as the most despicable ones in the entire story, and for good reason. He cowardly fled to a land he knew was now undefended, the Rangers being occupied with Sauron's northern armies or having gone south to form the Grey Company. He purposefully ruined that which was loved by the people who had wronged him, as if he hadn't started the whole thing by having them kidnapped, and he refuses to surrender, let alone apologize, even when he is yet again clearly lost, mocking the hobbits and Grema endlessly until his servant finally puts an end to his vitriol. It's dreadfully petty, and seeing a man of great intelligence and wisdom reduced to such a mean estate entirely through his own fault fills us with no small amount of righteous anger, and I hope with pity. I mean, Saruman stabs Frodo even as he is retreating from the Shire, only for his blade to snap on the mithril coat, and Frodo still doesn't let the other hobbits kill the wizard. If he can show such mercy, certainly we can find a little room in our hearts for the same. No such clemency is spared for the story's ultimate villain, however, and that brings us to our next chapter. Sauron in The Lord of the Rings is not so much a person as he is a force of nature. He is, whether acting from Barad-dûr or through the One Ring, evil incarnate, commanding armies and corrupting the heart of the Ringbearer. I specified in Lord of the Rings because Sauron was, of course, not evil in origin. He was a spirit corrupted by the prime Dark Lord, the prime subcreative rebel, Morgoth. He was given an opportunity of repentance when Morgoth was overcome, but he could not face the humiliation of recantation and suing for pardon, and so his temporary turn to good and benevolence ended in a greater relapse, until he became the main representative of evil of later ages. It sounds a bit like Saruman's plight, doesn't it? Or rather, Saruman's downfall bears a striking similarity to that of Sauron's, only far lamer, and his revival was far less successful. Despite the Dark Lord's mystical nature and enormous power, his story is utterly ordinary. He was a rational creature with goals and desires, certainly not all of which were bad, at least not at first, but who was twisted by another more powerful force of evil until he became consumed by the will to dominate all life. It is that domination, not mere power, that makes the One Ring so evil. Tolkien asserts that the War of the Ring is not merely about tyranny versus freedom, but rather about God and his sole right to divine honor, as Sauron would have seen himself worshipped as a god-king by the peoples of Middle-earth. Were the ring simply a powerful tool or weapon, it certainly could have been used by the men of Gondor in their fight against Mordor without hesitation or regret. But it is not a neutral entity, it is evil through and through, a creation of Sauron, a manifestation of his power, and it cannot be otherwise. This might beg the question, could the orcs be other than they are? Certainly we do not see any redeeming qualities or virtues in them. No, Amazon, no. Put that away. Now, in fairness to Rings of Bezos, orcs did at least breed. I mean, how else are there ever more of them? But the idea of a nuclear orc family is laughable. You need only read the passage in Return of the King when two orcs from separate factions have a petty argument that quickly escalates to homicide to understand their brutal nature. How does this mesh with Tolkien's Christian worldview, which necessarily believes all men capable of redemption? A reader asked him that question, and this was his response. I don't feel under any obligation to make my story fit with formalized Christian theology, though I actually intended it to be consonant with Christian thought and belief, which is asserted somewhere, Book 5, page 190, where Frodo asserts that the orcs are not evil in origin. The passage he is referencing there is actually from Book 6, and is the quote about the shadow only being able to mock that I read earlier. In the Silmarillion, we read that Melkor, later named Morgoth, captured elves and broke them through torture, and thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the orcs in envy and mockery of the elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. This begs the question, was Melkor capable of limiting the free will of a creature, or at least that of the creature's descendants? The orcs certainly seem to be limited in their ability to choose, unable to keep themselves from violence, whether against their enemies or each other. Is it possible so fundamental a right could be violated by a being who is not God? As far as I know, that question is never answered. The true nature of the orcs, save that they are in fact fully evil and cannot be otherwise, remains shrouded in mystery. And I'm okay with that. I kind of have to be. Tolkien himself said that he did not create this world, he discovered it. He didn't need every question answered, so neither should we. Knowing whether or not the orcs could possibly choose good, could opt for pity and mercy instead of death and slaughter, is far less important than understanding the larger picture of evil Tolkien paints in his epic tale. Though he presents us with many different visions of wickedness from Sauron to Gollum to Grema, we find similar themes running throughout. Evil is prideful, unwaveringly choosing itself over others. Evil scornfully rejects pity and mercy. It cannot give or receive either. Evil will persist in its errors from year to year and generation to generation, relenting only at the end of the world. And evil is boring. As we noted earlier, the tales of the Dark Lord of Mordor and the Toady of Saruman are remarkably thematically similar. Whether one lusts for power, riches, women, or what have you, it all looks largely the same. There are millions of different ways to build a beautiful home, but precious few by which you can destroy it. The humility of Faramir could never be confused with the magnanimity of Aragorn, which bears precious little resemblance to the steadfast perseverance of Frodo Baggins. But the villains of this story all meet their ends in similar fashion, desperately lashing out, seeking to seize control and power only to have it slip through their fingers. the obvious conclusion one must draw is that, given the opportunity, Grema would be Sauron. Ordinary, everyday evil is not less bad because it is limited in scope. The measure of vice and sin is in how they corrupt our hearts, and it is only within the hearts of men that we find true moral complexity, the ability to choose both good and evil, and the tragedy when the former is discarded in favor of the latter. Tolkien understood this better than any novelist I've ever read. His villains were given the chance time and time again to turn away from their evil ways, and the reader could easily see how they might redeem themselves, but they refused. Whether in our present story or hundreds of years before, they rejected the grace, the pity, and the mercy offered them. Evil cannot exist other than as a rejection, a privation of the good. Tolkien shows us this truth in clear and fantastic fashion, and that is what all great stories, real or fictional, ought to do. Tell the truth. Give us a secondary world that enhances our understanding of our own primary world. Within the pages of The Lord of the Rings, we find countless truths, including the fact that the peoples on the right side, hobbits, Rohirrim, men of Dale, or of Gondor, are not any better than men have been, or are, or can be. Nor would I add are the Haradrim, the Easterlings, the Dunlanders, or Grema Wormtongue any worse than men have been, or are, or can be. And what better way to hammer this point home than to quote the wonderings of this channel's namesake as he looks upon the face of a fallen enemy. He wondered what the man's name was, and where he came from, and if he was really evil of heart, or what lies or threats had led him on the long march from his home, and if he would not really rather have stayed there in peace. You want moral complexity? There you have it. The world, as Tolkien knew from his service on the front lines, is a dreadfully messy place, and trying to unravel all its threads of morality is an endlessly exhausting task. While good and evil may be simple, the men who choose them are not. It is only when we are able to see into the mind of a man, to see his choices and his motives for making them, that we can even hope to deem him good or evil, hero or villain. So he gave us that look. He showed us truths about the human condition that few other stories have ever rivaled. That is why The Lord of the Rings is a story that stays with us, that will be told and retold through the decades, passed down from generation to generation, the tale turning into a legend, and the legend a myth. And if you would like to hear my take on another mythic tale, check out this video on the story and themes of Halo Combat Evolved that I posted to my channel devoted to in-depth analyses of the philosophies of video game stories. If you are so inclined, please like and share this video and consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you all so much for watching. God bless, and I will see you in the next one.